Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective to Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia.
And I'm Katie.
And today, Katie, you brought the topic.
We're going to talk about mindfulness.
We are. We're going to be mindful this hour.
Yeah, I feel like Claudia, I feel like that used to be a very big buzzword. But so, as probably everybody knows by now who's listened to us at all, I am very out of touch with pop culture and what is popular now. So, like, are people still talking about mindfulness, or is that a thing that kind of um, has been overshadowed by other mental health related topics in the media and so forth and so on?
That's a good question because I feel like in my world, it's still a thing, but I don't know if I hear so much about it anymore. I do feel like several years ago, it was more of a buzzword.
Mhm.
Um, and it kind of has disappeared a little bit, I think. I mean, I don't hear too much of it. Of course, in my day to day and my work, I dive into it a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't know if people are still kind of trying to practice it or hearing about it. I feel like a lot of things have fallen by the wayside with more pressing mental health concerns, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. What okay, well, so maybe we should start by just like defining it then.
Yeah, that's
How do
probably.
you define that? Like when you work with your clients,
Uh-huh.
if you introduce this as a tool or a concept, how do you usually define that?
I tend to define it most of the time as finding ways to be present in this moment and whatever that is, because I do hear I hear a lot of pushback about, because I think meditation used to be a big thing and then people got frustrated with their quote unquote inability to meditate, right, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Because I think there's this idea that meditation is you're just blank and sitting there, but it's actually very different, right? It's being in the moment with what comes and goes in your
Mhm.
consciousness. It's not I experience nothing. Like most people that meditate don't experience just silence and nothing, right? So I get a lot of feedback on that. And I am also not a super still sitter type of person.
Uh-huh.
That's not, but what I always tell people is there's a million ways to meditate. You can walk and meditate,
Right.
right? You can peel onions and meditate. You
Yeah.
can running is for those that are into running. I am not a long distance runner, but I do hear a lot of like runners say that that's like hypnotic. There's like a rhythm and a meditation that starts to happen when people run for long distances. um, right, so there's a million different ways to get there, but it's really about kind of bringing your awareness to this present moment.
Yep. I love that.
Yeah.
That. Yeah, I think I have very similar definition and I add a little bit at the beginning of mine and a little bit at the end of mine. Let me see. And again, this isn't something I've talked about in a little while, but it was on my mind this morning. So let me see if I can remember how I usually tell people. Usually I think what I'll say is that mindfulness is the art and the practice of being fully present in any given moment and aware of what is happening, mind, body, spirit, both internally and externally, without judgment. That's a lot, isn't
Yeah.
it?
You add just a touch. I'm like, be in the moment. You're
I
like,
know.
and here's all the guys.
I added some icing to the cake. But I think that so like I like to tell people that it's that first part, right? The art and the practice, because it's not easy, right? It sounds so simple, like, oh, just be in the moment, right? Live in the moment. That like little catchphrase, right? Live in the moment. But like it's not easy. And it does take practice and dedication. Um, and intention, right? And it's not something that we can just pull out of our pockets so easily, right? So um and then this piece about being aware, right, of what's happening, everything that's happening internally and externally. And I think I probably got that from my days as being primarily a trauma therapist and to help people ground, right? Which we can talk about in a minute if we want to, as maybe a correlate of mindfulness, right? Or maybe the opposite of being dissociated or checked out, as a coping skill, and being aware of what's happening right here, right now, both inside our bodies and around us, and then using an attitude of non-judgment for that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I think that's the challenge. I think we don't realize how disconnected we sometimes are,
Oh my gosh, yes.
and one of the things, I mean, I think I've told a lot of clients this lately, kind of talked about doing these like minor check-ins, like at work while they're walking to the bathroom, just kind of a body scan, right? Just 5 seconds of how am I feeling? What's going on? What am I noticing? Right? Because what happens for a lot of people is like we plow through, we plow through, and then all of a sudden we have like some kind of struggle, right? Whether it's like an emotional breakdown or rage, we're frustrated, and like it came out of almost nowhere, but it didn't,
Right.
right? There was probably a million and one signs, but we push it down because we're busy. And
Hmm.
so I have people just on a really basic level, like, take a bathroom break when you're sitting at your desk for 5 seconds. It doesn't have to be hours, right? Just take some time to notice what's going on with you,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? In this moment. Um, and again, right, without judgment and just curiosity, almost like, huh, what's that about? Okay. Right. Um,
And this is it's something like for you and I probably, and maybe people we've worked with, where it feels like, oh, this is just such a simple elemental thing, right? We're like, duh, of course we should be checking in, right? Like, but to your point, so many people don't, and maybe even haven't considered that, right? Just going on autopilot, and as opposed to noticing, like you said, in the moment, in any given moment, what's happening in my body, right? Where are there areas of tension? um are there needs that I'm neglecting, right? And what's my body temperature like? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty, right? Do I need to stretch or move around?
mhm.
Do I need to turn the volume of things in my world up or down? you know um and then what's happening, are there areas of discomfort in my body that need to be attended to, right? And then what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my external environment, right?
Yeah.
And being aware and intentional about those things, like you said, in the moment, so that we can cope if we need to cope all along the process of, the day as it unfolds. Or, god forbid, we were in a challenging situation, right? A meeting or an interview or a crisis situation where we need to be able to be really dialed in and really present, and very intentional about our coping.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's a little bit of a selling point of like, okay, well, why would I want to do this? Like,
Yeah.
why does it matter? Right. I don't have time. Sometimes, maybe we don't want to be mindful. Maybe we don't want to notice what's happening with us because there is potentially some discomfort in that. Right. And usually that comes in from that judgment piece. But I think sometimes people get used to not being aware, and I always tell people, it's interesting because I don't know, and the things I read and I'm consuming still talk a good amount about mindfulness, and a lot of that is, I am so sorry, my dog is throwing a bone, so if you hear like I can't
Gosh, I love
working from home, um
it.
so, so
Mine's gonna start snoring any minute. She's right beside me too, like dead asleep. So she's a snorer, my dog is. So we'll hear all the dog sounds today.
I mean, never a dull moment. So back to mindfulness and the
Yes.
Zen podcast. Oh my God, with a bone like throwing it against the floor. Um, right. But really, this idea of when we're in the past, right? So when we're revisiting something that happened 5 minutes ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, right? There's potentially some feeling of regret, some mourning, some woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? And if we're in the future, there's some anxieties about the how do I control this outcome? What if this happens? What if that happens? And so really what I tell people is the antidote to, I guess, depression and anxiety, right? The either one of those, like living in the past or kind of worrying about the future, is to bring yourself to this very moment.
That's right.
And it
That's right.
sounds super easy,
Uh-huh.
but our brains like to jump. So even when we're in this moment, right, the thoughts that come and go can pull you to the past and pull you to the future. So it is a little bit of, training that muscle to get used to bringing it back.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we can practice that, the more it kind of balances out those moments of anxiety or depression.
Yeah, and there's some really good authors out there, and again, one of the things about our field, right, is that there's so much richness in writing. And it used to be that was books, right? And now we have YouTubers and bloggers and podcasters, and we have TikTokers and Instagrammers. And so there's so much to read. If you were to search for information on mindfulness, which, if this listening to this kind of intrigues you, or you want to follow up more, or you just even want to remind yourself on a day-to-day basis, there's a ton of great resources out there. But I know some of what I have read in the past has come from people like Eckhart Tolle, who I love, love, love. He wrote The Power of Now and A New Earth. Ram Dass, Marianne Williamson, Marsha Linehan, who's the founder of DBT, which stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. She incorporates a lot of this into her skills training. Claudia, are there other authors that you have like really enjoyed reading or listening to over the years? Because what I'm about to say, the reason I brought this in now is like I'm aware that my thoughts on this topic are both a culmination of my clinical work over the years, but also kind of everything that I've taken from some of these great thinkers, if you will. So I don't know exactly who to attribute all this to, except for kind of the collective, if you will.
Yeah, well, because it's not a new concept, right? And it is kind of tied into um, practices that maybe are like more historical practices, right? Like meditation, mindfulness, kind of centering the self is not a new concept. I think it's gone a little bit to the wayside in the busy world, but it's always kind of been there, right? But no, I mean, I think you covered a lot of people talk about it. I mean, there's no shortage of people that talk about it. I don't know if I've read a book about anything clinical that hasn't spoken about it. Now, is it always called mindfulness? No.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? Um, it's not always referred to in that way.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty present in a lot of our clinical work and clinical practices, and spiritual work is
Mm-hmm.
it's there too. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know who to attribute it to either. It's just kind
Yeah.
of always been, and then people do their different takes on it and their different spins on it, and
Mm-hmm. I
yeah.
like to this idea of like, so what? So why would we do this, right? And what you said is the antidote. I say that almost the exact same thing. It's funny sometimes. Like I like I hear some of the things you say, and I'm like, I say the same thing. Like that is how I describe it. It is the antidote. A lot of people say to depression and anxiety, like living in the past. Some people refer to as depression. That's one way people have defined depression from time to time, or focusing on the future and creating stories about bad things that could happen in the future that are not actually happening in the here and now. That's how some people define anxiety, right? So if we're in the present, we can't be doing any of that. We can't be focused on the past, and we can't be focused on the future. And then this is another really kind of like interesting thing, I think, to try to wrap your mind around, which is, kind of another part of this idea of mindfulness, which is that in the present moment, there's very, very little that we can't tolerate, right? Like in this moment right now, like let's imagine, even if I'm having pain in this moment, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, about something that's happening now, which is rare, right? It's very rare for us to, as humans, I think, have pain about the now. Like I just said, we typically create pain by dwelling in the past, creating stories about things that are sad or negative about ourselves, about others, about the world, about our life, about our fate, about our destiny, if you will, or about the future. But right now, here in this moment, there's very rarely actual pain. And of the moments where there is actual pain in the moment, whether it's physical or emotional, most often we can tolerate that pain.
Yeah.
And so we create suffering by adding that judgment piece, right? And so that word judgment, I remember when I was first introduced to that kind of aspect of mindfulness, the non judgment aspect of it. I remember wrestling with that word because I'd always thought judgment was like assigning a negative characteristic to something, right? I'm judging that thing. But I think the way I learned it in relation to mindfulness is just any kind of value statement, any assessment whatsoever, rather than just it is what it is, right? But whether it's a good, a bad, a should or shouldn't, right? I can't tolerate this. I'm not able to do this. It's not fair that things are this way, right? Um, Whenever we label an experience with a qualifier, I think, in the terms of mindfulness, that is judging it, right? And so often we create our suffering with judgment, that we could have pain in a moment, right? Let's say like physical pain. And then if we were to layer on, but I can't tolerate this, or what if this doesn't stop, or when is this going to stop, or is this okay, or maybe this is a bad thing, that's when we start suffering in those moments.
Yeah. Well, and the concept of pain, emotion, I'm going to stick with emotional pain just for this example, but right,
Mhm.
but I guess it's true for physical too.
Yeah.
Somehow we expect not to experience it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And yet there's just no way that is going to be a thing,
Right.
right? You lose people, you have crappy days, you get fired from your job, you struggle. Like, this is the human experience.
Uh-huh.
And we do everything in our power to avoid that feeling, right? So we get anxious and we control and we control and we control because I don't want to feel that pain, right? But a lot of what we do is like to skirt that feeling. And I think what mindfulness kind of brings into the reality is that is a part of our experience.
Yeah.
And to sit with it
Uh-huh.
and not judge it, right? Which sounds so easy, but we
It's really
create
not.
so many narratives, right? We create narratives. That's part of what our brain does. It fills in gaps, it tells stories, right? Sometimes they work for us and make us stronger and more confident, and sometimes they don't work for us, right? Um, but this idea that we shouldn't experience struggle
Mhm.
and that there's something wrong with us if we are.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yet we all experience it and we all feel like we shouldn't. And it's it's so interesting to me that that's kind of, I don't know where that started from,
Yeah.
right? Um, but that's another reason I find mindfulness super helpful because it is all accepting.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if you're feeling great or if you feel like crap, right? It's just, it is what it is. And we're going to honor what is and just sit
Mhm.
with that.
Yeah.
Um, and somewhere along the line, it's really easy for us to sit with happiness and really hard for us to sit with, sadness.
Right. Well, and
But
don't you think
neither one is good nor bad inherently, right? They're just different experiences.
yeah. That's deep, dude.
Yeah, we've gotten really pain adverse, right? So we do things, right?
Mhm.
We cope, we drink, we do drugs, we go shopping, we have sex, I don't know, do all kinds of things, right? To
Mhm.
not feel the negative.
Mhm.
And mindfulness, I think, kind of brings that balance back of like, okay, you're gonna feel negative, and that is okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? That's part of the wide variety of experiences and feelings one should have. That is one.
Mhm.
Um,
It's interesting because I was reflecting on this. This fall, as you know, has so far shaped out to be a season of loss
Yeah.
for me. And I won't go into any details in this podcast, but I'll just leave it at that. And this concept of loss, right? I think is again a human experience. We don't get through life without it, unless we're the one who leaves. And we don't want that. That's probably not a good alternative, right? But if you hang around on this planet for long enough, you'll lose somebody in some shape or fashion, whether it's to death, disability, divorce, other sorts of breakups, blah blah blah. And I think that is one of the greatest pains of being human, right? Is this concept of loss. And yet, if we bring mindfulness to this, right, in each moment, I'm sure are some moments where we might miss the person that we lost. Genuinely, in this moment, I wish that person were with me now, right? However, don't you think that more often we create suffering by telling stories about things like it's not fair, or it shouldn't be this way, right?
Yes.
Or this isn't right, or this isn't just, or they were taken too soon, right? You hear things like that. Why do bad things happen to good people? And, you know, I've reflected on this loss this weekend. Sundays, which was yesterday, for when you guys are going to listen to this down the road. But yes, today's Monday for us, and so Sunday was yesterday, and that's our family's like day off. It's like our day of rest where we sometimes just chill. Very often that's our goal. Our aim is just to chill and like be very lazy, be very down, and just be with each other and do very little. And thinking of this concept of like, okay, in this moment, what is left is beautiful, right? I could focus on what's not here, right? On the loss, and I could create a lot of stories for myself, and I could create a lot of pain about what shouldn't be, or what could have been, or what used to be, or what I wish would have been different, right? But what's left in this moment, in any given moment, at least for me, right, as I'm reflecting over the weekend and Sunday on our quiet day to think and rest and recuperate, is beautiful, right? What remains is still beautiful. And I think that there's a fine line, right? And maybe you could speak to this, right? Like, we don't ever want to avoid our pain, right? And so, to your point of like, we distract ourselves with substances or process addictions or busyness, or, oh, I can't be still. Let me scroll social media obsessively, like constantly 24/7, right? Because what happens if I leave myself with my thoughts? We don't want to get into a pattern of avoiding and dissociating. We do want to be able to honor feelings and honor pain and the grief process and process things, right? But yet at the same time, if we are truly present at any given moment, is it really that bad?
Right.
What do you think? How do we know how to balance all that?
Well, and I think you're right. I mean, I I think about the losses in my own life, and I do find that the pain comes from the what if stories. The what if it should have been this way. It should have worked out this way, right? They should have lived longer. They should be whatever the story is, right?
Yeah.
That's what tends to flare up feelings of loss,
Uh-huh.
right? Because if you look back, sometimes you can say, those are some nice moments. You have those nice moments, right? And maybe you miss those moments, but I think it's kind of when we kind of take it out of context. I think whenever we can get to a place where something just is what it is.
Hmm. Have I talked to you about the parable of the vinegar tasters?
No. You have not.
This is not. Oh, you crazy person.
I have not heard about this. What would it explain?
Okay, so this is so fun. I think this is so cute. I wish I could find it, and I might not be able to pull it right now, but the client and I are doing a book trade, like a loaning book trade. And it's a teenage client of mine, which makes it even more special to me. And so he brought this book to me about Taoism, which, to your point, like this is very, very, very old tradition, right? Comes from China and is, I guess, a religion, but it seems to me so far in what I've read, it's a bit more of like a philosophy, if you will, right? And I'm reading it, The Tao of Pooh, which is kind of like, a modern day spin on um, like the Tao Te Ching, which is very, very heady and very hard to read. I've been told. I've actually never attempted to read that book, but it's kind of like the Bible of Taoism, if you will. But so the Tao of Pooh kind of takes the story of Winnie the Pooh and the forest creatures and like uses those concepts and characters to illustrate the points of Taoism. And I like the little book so far. It's a quick read, and no, it's still heavy. It's not a novel, right? But like um the parable of the vinegar tasters is part of like the intro, right? And so basically in Chinese tradition at a certain point in history, there were three major kind of religious mm, what would you say? Religions. I'll just say it that way. And so one's Confucianism, one was Buddhism, and then the third was Taoism. And so there's like a painting, right? And in the painting, there were three men standing at a vat of vinegar. And it says, I'm just going to read this little excerpt from the book. Each has dipped his finger into the vinegar and has tasted it. The expression on each man's face shows his individual reaction. Since the painting is allegorical, we are to understand that these are no ordinary vinegar tasters, but are instead representatives of the three teachings of China, and that the vinegar they are sampling represents the essence of life. The three masters are Confucius, Buddha, and Lao Tzu, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, author of the oldest existing book of Taoism. The first has a sour look on his face, the second wears a bitter expression, and the third man is smiling. To Confucius, life seemed rather sour. He believed that the present was out of step with the past, and the government of man on earth was out of harmony with the way of heaven, the government of the universe. Therefore, he emphasized reverence for the ancestors as well as the ancient rituals and ceremonies in which the emperor, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this goes into Confucianism a little bit, but a saying was recorded about Confucius: if the mat was not straight, the master would not sit. So basically, kind of like always analyzing things and judging things to be, is it perfect or is it not perfect? If it's not perfect, it's not okay, right? And then to Buddha, the second figure in the painting, life on earth was bitter, filled with attachments and desires that led to suffering. The world was seen as a setter of traps, a generator of illusions, a revolving wheel of pain for all creatures. In order to find peace, the Buddhists considered it necessary to transcend, quote, the world of dust and to reach nirvana, literally a state of no wind, although essentially optimistic attitude of the Chinese altered Buddhism considerably after it was brought, blah, 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 blah. More history. Okay. So basically, the Buddha's approach was like life is suffering, right? Vinegar is how was he? Sour, I guess. And then Lao Tzu, right? So the founder or author of Taoism, basically talks about the more forcing, the more trouble, whether heavy or light, wet or dry, fast or slow, everything has its own nature within it, which couldn't be violated. When abstract and arbitrary rules were imposed from the outside, struggle was inevitable. Only then did life become sour. To Lao Tzu, the world was not a setter of traps, but a teacher of valuable lessons. As lessons needed to be learned, just as laws needed to be followed, then all would go well. What he saw operating behind everything in heaven and earth, he called Tao, the way, a basic principle. Blah, 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 blah. So the essence is, right, that we just take things as they are. And that's all. We stop forcing things, we stop labeling things. He says this, it says, the happy serenity is the most noticeable characteristic of the Taoist personality. And this kind of trusting that whatever is unfolding in on earth is kind of a reflection of divine timing, right? And the divine order. And so essentially, right, so these three vinegar tasters, that's why the Taoist is smiling. They're all tasting the same thing. The experience is the same, right? One is labeling it as being imperfect and so therefore not okay. The other's labeling it as being sour and a source of suffering. And the Taoist is just saying, like, oh, well, it's vinegar. Of course it tastes this way, right?
Wow.
And just kind of taking it as it is. And that was just such a cool reminder when I read that introduction about the power of mindfulness and the ability to look at life circumstances, even challenging ones or painful ones, and accepting it as it is and not labeling, and creating a sense of peace in that moment, and even happy serenity, as they say in Taoism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think, for a lot of things, we subscribe an attribute to it, right? We decide whether it's good or bad.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's not the case. Like sometimes things can be neutral and then we give it a feeling, right? So even a breakup to the people not involved is just neutral, right? If you're not in the breakup, it is a neutral thing, right? If you're a stranger and you're like, oh, I heard so and so and so and so broke up, you're like, oh, okay. Like you might be like, bummer for them, but like you have no feelings about it, right? When you're in the breakup, you give it a narrative,
Hmm.
right? And you have a feeling about it. But sometimes the feeling we give is not necessarily, you may say, oh, this is terrible, without realizing that down the road, you've now been freed up to meet
Yeah.
a better partner, a more compatible partner, right? Sometimes we say a loss is sad and it's hard and it's negative, and then sometimes we change our story, right? You meet the next person, you're like, oh no, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? We just rewrite
Right.
we rewrite history. But in the moment, we probably have a lot of stories about it. And I don't know if I don't think it's realistic to not navigate the
Mhm.
world with stories,
Yeah.
because we all create our story. And in any moment, we all create our narrative. I think the key is recognizing that that is what we do.
Hmm.
So if I'm involved in a breakup and my story is I'm not good enough for that person, right? I can tell myself that story all I want. A lot of people do tell that story,
Hmm. Or
right?
make it worse or bigger. Like, not only am I not good enough for that person, but I'm not good enough at all. Like, there's something
Right.
wrong with
Or
me.
had I only been whatever perfection I expect of myself or they expected of me or whatever, right? And we tell ourselves these stories. Um, they become more real the more we repeat them, for starters. And so I think if you can say, okay, this is the story that popped into my head about why this happened, and then like detach just a little from that, being like, okay, that is my thought, right? That is my story. That does not mean it's the truth.
Right.
Now, you still may feel that way. You still may carry that with you a little bit, but I think it's creating space to say, I get I'm creating stories. When I'm in a place of anxiety, I get that I'm playing out a future that may or may not happen.
Mhm.
And I'm getting caught in that narrative cycle of like future storytelling. Let me bring myself back to this moment, right? I don't think we can stop it from happening, because we're wired to create stories. We're wired to create connection. We're wired to make things make sense. And part of what we do when we do that is we create these narratives that may or may not be accurate, right? We pass judgment, we do a whole story. Um, but if you can be aware of that, then I think you can create some space to sit with it and be like, okay, well, let me at least entertain that this is how I feel. This is the story I've created, but that might not be the truth. Right?
Mhm.
And there's room for other things. And so let me bring it to this moment and what is true in this moment, right? Kind of again, that it is what it is. So I think it's like a constant exercise we have to do.
Yeah.
It's not I am mindful, boom, done, success. I think everything we talk about, every time we do a podcast, we're like, there's no there's no end in sight, people.
I know.
Because you and I mean, we do it too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we work with clients on this stuff, but don't think that I don't get caught up in my own stuff in the middle of the day, right? That I don't have my own narrative that comes up. Like we all do.
Right.
It's just to some extent being aware that we do that, how it impacts us both negatively and positively, right? And then finding moments to just sit in what is.
Yes.
And put those stories on a shelf to be told a later day. Right. And the understanding that what story I tell myself impacts how I think and feel and act. Right. If I do a breakup and I say I wasn't good enough for that person, I didn't live up to be the perfect partner, I feel very differently than if I say I'm better than that and I deserve to be treated better and like bye. Right. I'll be okay. Same situation, different narrative. And then I feel differently about it.
Right.
So I think you can also tinker a little bit. This leaves mindfulness, but you can tinker a little bit with the narratives you tell yourself.
Totally. And that reminds me of that podcast we did on anxiety, right? Of this idea of we do create our own stories, right? That as humans, we have this ability to be creative in this prefrontal cortex, and we can create these amazing narratives, right? But like, why are we so, well, we answered this and we can remind everybody, but we as humans, we are so much more likely to create a negative narrative than a positive one, right? Like it is. I mean, how many people go through breakups and like genuinely, authentically at the core feel and believe, oh, I'm so grateful for this. This is opening me up to I am so much better than those circumstances. And I am so excited to see who will come in my path next that will be even better of a partner for me. Right? Like,
Nobody. No, because you mourn the loss, right?
yeah.
And we have egos that get bruised and
Crushed.
yeah.
Decimated.
Right. I mean, and that plays a role too, right? Sometimes it is our ego and not our like core self that's reacting. It doesn't feel good to get rejected, even if at the core we're like, this wasn't great for us anyway. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some we've kind of gone all over with mindfulness because it's not really right. It applies to so many different areas of your life
Yes.
that it's not, I don't know, it's not necessarily, a daily meditation practice. It can be in moments. I mean, I've told clients to like, sit with their cat or dog and pet their pets and
Yeah.
just be in that moment. Like it doesn't have to be this, super structured ritual. But tell me a little bit, Katie, what are some like great mindfulness tips and techniques you tell your clients?
Well, I think it depends on the purpose, right? So like again, so it's the art and the practice of being present in the moment, right? And being fully aware of what's going on, mind, body, spirit, both internally and externally, right? So like you said a moment ago, right? Internally we can do a scan, a body scan, right? What's happening in my body right now? What am I feeling? Where am I feeling what in my body physically? And then a cool way we can kind of spin off on that are questions about, ooh, I wonder what kind of a feeling word would I label that with, or what sort of a physiological sensation would I call that? If that had a color, what color would it be? If it had a shape, what shape would it be? Is it moving? Is it stagnant? If it is moving, how is it moving? Right. And we can kind of watch that, so to speak, of what's going on the inside. And sometimes those internal things need some attention and some care. Again, like if we're hot or cold, or if we're in some discomfort, if we need to stretch, if we need to eat, if we need to drink, if we need to, go to the restroom, or, just shift position, so forth and so on, we can attend to our needs. The thoughts, right? Being aware of them, trying to catch them as they're happening, noticing them. And choosing whether we want to stay in the thought or not stay in the thought, right? what emotions are happening for me right now, right? Feelings. So sometimes people have difficulty differentiating. I think we talked about this maybe 2 times ago with cognitive triad between thoughts and feelings and um, physiological sensations, right? That all three exist at the same time, always in all people, right? What emotions am I feeling? Happy, sad, angry, scared, confused, frustrated, overwhelmed? How would I label this experience? And again, it's okay to label, it's just not about judging your experience and saying, this is what is happening now. And I can be present with that. I can accept it the way it is. Maybe I can make some, again, mindful adjustments to make my experience different or easier if I want to. Um, but maybe I just stay present with this. And the cool thing about pain is that it doesn't last, Claudia, right? Like pain comes and pain goes, whether it's physiological or emotional. And if we can stay in it, stay present with it, like riding out a wave, it will come and it will go. And sometimes it takes minutes, sometimes it's seconds, sometimes it's months or years,
But
right?
even in the months,
Uh huh.
there's moments of
Yeah.
not. Like, even if your overarching theme is sadness and pain,
Uh-huh.
I think of this a lot when, you go to a funeral, right? And then you're doing you're doing like the family gatherings kind of afterwards. And typically what starts to happen is people start telling stories about the person.
Right.
And then there's laughter, right? There's some story. I'm so sorry, that's the dog again. There is, if anyone was asleep, you're up now. But there's some stories that make you laugh. Now, everyone is sad in that moment, but we're not, like, we do have moments of laughter, even in extreme sadness.
Mhm. Yeah, no, you're right. I know. I mean, we have a funeral to go to tomorrow, and it's just such a rich, experience, right? And there is, to your point, if I heard somebody say this one time, grief is intense love in the absence of the object of affection, right? So isn't that like a little bit of a twisty thing for your mind to try to wrap around? Like that if there weren't such intense love, there wouldn't be such grief, right? And so is grief a bad thing? Or is it just the holding of that intense love in the absence of the person? In which case, what a beautiful thing, right? Because I think that's one of the blessings of life, right? Is the ability to love. And
Yes. Yeah. And so in any, right, and but that's the thing, right? Sometimes we hold two opposing things at the same time.
yeah.
You hold pain of loss, but you hold love, right?
Huh?
You hold sadness, and then you hold happiness and laughter.
Yeah.
And we can do all that at the same time, and I think it's honoring the fact that everything comes in waves, right? There's nothing wrong to be sad and have a moment of laughter,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's nothing wrong with having moments of laughter and then feeling sad because you're missing someone or you're whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we get so judgy about our own experiences when in any given day we're on this like ride of emotions,
Yeah.
right? I might feel content now and I get stuck in traffic 5 minutes from now and I'm agitated and then I'm stressed and then I'm happy and then I'm sad. And
Mm-hmm.
my whole day is just this cluster of, I don't even want to call them ups and downs because that would be a judgment, right? But like of moving through different states,
Mm-hmm.
none of them lasting that long, including happiness, right? Like
Yeah.
I
Right.
might go from happy and laughing to just blah, whatever, right? To neutral, to frustrated, to stressed out, to anxious, to whatever. But none of the states last long.
Mm-hmm.
I think we notice the negative. And I think that's where it is like, right? It's the discomfort pulls our attention, makes us feel like that is the overarching feeling. I work with a lot of clients like, I just want to be happy like all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but nobody is,
That's right.
right? Like that's not a goal. Well, I want to be happier more. Okay. But sometimes it's, are you noticing the happier more or are you only focusing on the negative parts? Because those feel uncomfortable and those pull your attention,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I think part of mindfulness is also giving attention to all states a little more equally. not just hyper focusing on when I feel sad or angry or the negative, but also the when I feel, content, when I feel calm, when I feel happy.
Yeah.
And allowing those emotions to kind of come and go without getting tied to any one of them.
Yeah. That phrase, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
For me, when I hear you say that like that, allowing them to come and go, not getting it tied to them, right? And even with happy stuff, right? To
That's right.
know that like I remember back in the day when I used to commute an hour to work, and this was like a long time ago, and I would listen to Oprah's Soul series on XM radio in my 2001 Honda Accord on my way down to McDonough, Georgia for my counseling position at the time, which I loved, and I loved that morning commute. And I remember hearing her say, she was talking about this concept of like mountaintop experiences, right? These highs of life. And she said, one of the problems that we create is wanting to stay on the mountaintop. But the only way to stay on a mountaintop is to be stagnant. And if we're going to journey through life, we have to go up and down and up again and down again. And knowing that even in these happy moments, right? Like even on these mountaintop places, right? Where we can look around and be like, man, everything is so good, right? My health is good. My finances are good. My relationships are good. My mind is good. My body's good, right? Everything is great. It's not going to last, right? Like there will be things that will come your way in life, right? We will have those losses. We will have setbacks. We will have disappointments. We will get hurt. We'll have hurt feelings. We'll have a hurt body from time to time, right? We'll get stuck in that traffic.
Yeah. I mean, and all those things are unavoidable. And I think we get in our heads about it's just me, right? This why me.
Yeah.
It's not just you. It's literally everyone. And their highs and their lows may look different. Some people have different highs or cooler highs or more exciting highs and whatever, right? But every single human has those experiences. And we get so we start to isolate ourselves with the why me? Why am I the one that's having a low? It's like, well, but it's your turn now, right? But someone else is having a low right now too. And someone may have a low a week from now. And it is inevitable, right? That we kind of have these ups and downs and highs and lows through life. And I think if we can kind of sit in a place of, maybe finding comfort in the fact that like every human has this experience, even if it looks different. And none of us are immune to pain and loss and hurt and physical discomfort and, all the things.
Should we disclose to our audience at this point in time who you and I are mutually like girl crushing on and have been for many, many years?
Oh, where is this where are we going? I don't know where this podcast is going, people. Let's hear it. Where are we going? Katie, what you got going on?
Well, we love Pink.
We do.
We love Pink. And Pink is our idol for so many reasons. She's just such a badass. Her music is amazing. Her athletic prowess is like no other. And she's just cool. I mean, she's just so freaking cool. Claudia and I have gone to 2 concerts
Mind you, we don't actually know her. This is just our perception. Yeah.
She listens to this and you're like, oh yeah, like they're my besties.
We've never met Pink. So we don't actually know what she's really like, right? This is our perception.
We like everything we do know about her. But we go to these concerts and like I'm like, Claudia, don't let me shave my head after this, literally. But
that is true. We had to stop you a few times.
Conversation because she's just so cool. And so one of the coolest things she's done here recently, besides all of her amazing music and just physical amazingness, is she has a winery now, which just also is like, I want to do all the things. I want to dance in glitter leotards and sing like she sings and shave my head. And I want to own a winery, damn it. But the name of her winery, do you remember the name of her winery?
Two Wolves.
Your quiz. That's right. And so I was thinking about yesterday because my husband, introduced me to a song from her that I had not heard. We were listening to some music and on a little Sunday drive, and he played a song for me that she had done a duet, and a lot of her music is really very poignant when it comes to like just the pain of being human. She even has like an album called Hurts to Be Human, right? And she sings about it in this really like both deep and also kind of edgy rockerish way. And so this I can't presume as to why she's very open about, you know, her own struggles with being human. And I can't presume as to why the winery is named Two Wolves, but there is a parable of two wolves. Have you heard of that parable?
Mm-mm, I have not.
So basically, like, okay, so I googled it real quick, right? And it says an old Cherokee teaching from the Cherokee Indian tribe, right? And it talks about like there are two wolves inside of me, right? And they're battling a fight. A fight is going on inside of me. A terrible fight is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. He continued, the other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside of you and inside every other person, too. This is a grandfather speaking to his grandson. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? And the old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed.
Yeah, that's the truth.
And that might be a good way to kind of wrap up today, right? This idea of mindfulness and this concept of, you know, again, the being present in the moment, being fully aware of every aspect of what is happening in the here and now, trying our hardest not to apply labels and judgments about whether or not that's good, whether or not it's bad, recognizing that we do create our own stories about the past, we create our own stories about the present, and our stories about the future. Typically, our stories are painful ones and create suffering for us. But if we can be here and now in the present moment, very rarely is anything not able to be tolerated. And that we do have the power to assign a narrative. And that, you know, if we feed the wolf that is full of beauty and joy, gratitude, that one will win versus the wolf that is full of despair.
Yeah,
Deep stuff,
absolutely.
yo.
Right. And it's right. It's not a destination to reach, which I don't think anything we
Yeah.
ever talk about is a destination, right? It's a constant, you have to feed that wolf. You have to pay attention to it. You have to notice it. Um, and it's an ongoing practice and it's an ongoing muscle to train, really. This idea of being able to bring yourself in those hard moments when you're flooded with emotion, to bring yourself to the present
Mm-hmm.
is not easy, right? And so be kind and gentle with yourself if you are struggling with it, and keep practicing, because, you know, as with anything, it takes practice and it's a muscle we have to grow, and then it's easier to use that muscle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
All right, people, go be mindful.
Thanks for listening.
All right, bye.